Hey there everyone, I'm Decadence, and in today's video, I'm gonna be doing a critique commentary on the trans-identifying man that is Blaire White. As someone who is gender critical, or just honestly, pro-reality, who does not believe in transgender ideology and sees it for the societal lie that it is, I've had my critical eye on Blaire for quite a long while now, and I figured that it was about time to take him to task. Blaire White has been lauded as one of the good ones, someone who is true trans, aka someone who is quote unquote actually trans, whatever that means. And I've even seen some people who claim to be against transgender ideology bend the knee and give men like him a pass and even go as far to say that he really is true trans, which is absolutely ridiculous, and in this video I'm gonna outline why, as well as speak on the frank truth about him. The point of this video is not to maliciously attack Blaire. It's simply just to point out the things he does and pushes for under the guise of the quote-unquote true trans narrative, which is just as toxic and ridiculous as the louder trans rights activists who come off much more aggressively in your face with it. And more importantly, if you really are someone who wants to see the transgender ideology go away, or at the very least get out of legislation and children's school curriculum, you must be critical of all the ideology, not just what you find convenient. So with all that said, let's get into the video. So there's quite a bit that I have to say about Blaire, but I think that it's very important that I go a bit into what I learned about his past. Some of which I've known about for a long time now, and how it most definitely played a significant role in what made him fall down the delusional path of thinking that he's quote unquote trans. I'm gonna be explaining this in a summary rundown type of way, so anyway. Something that I've noticed that not many people seem to know about Blaire's past before he joined YouTube, at least from what he had shared in his old live streams from the early 2010s that he used to do that he has since taken down or privated, is that his family quite frankly were a bunch of traditional conservatives, and more importantly, his parents never accepted him when he started exhibiting gender non-conforming tendencies. When he was around the age of 10 or 11, when he expressed interest in wanting to grow his hair a tad longer like that of a skater, his parents disapproved of this vehemently.
One of the things my grandma brought up was, your grandfather still cannot get over that at your 8th grade graduation, you didn't cut your hair. Because when I was in 8th grade, that was when I was first starting to kind of come into my own, barely at all. I had hair the length of just like a little skater kid. You guys know, little old school, emo-ish skater haircuts, maybe an inch of hair. And they were asking me prior to graduation to cut it. And I remember that was the thing I was hanging on to was that little bit of hair, because it meant, maybe it's hard to explain, but as someone who is struggling to find themselves when I was 13, 12 or 13, I graduated early, I think. That inch of hair was everything to me. I was like, oh my God, I have an inch of hair. And that makes me feel good about myself. So I didn't cut it. And I couldn't wrap my head around today having this phone call with my grandmother saying that my grandfather doesn't want to see me because in 8th grade, I didn't cut my hair for graduation. I couldn't wrap my head around it that as a 25-year-old, I'm suffering a consequence of not talking to my family because I didn't cut my hair in 8th grade. So they told me the reasons they don't want me around is because I didn't cut my hair for 8th grade graduation, because it was an inch long, because I posted something angsty when I was 15 on Facebook, and because I was not at the hospital for my dad's death when no one told me he was dying, even my dad. It was my dad's decision to shield me from it. But again, I keep telling myself, it's not that. It's that I'm trans. Those are the scapegoats they're using. Those are the excuses because they don't have the strength to tell me, you're a tranny, fuck off.
Notice how he's foolishly saying how him wanting to have longer hair was because he was quote unquote trans. No, Blaire, you were exhibiting gender non-conforming tendencies as a boy. already dealing with the disapproval of his preference and appearance as well as his sexuality from his family at large, along with the likelihood of experiencing some bullying and or judgment from his peers. This kind of hardship also carried over into his dating life, where he experienced difficulty when trying to date. In the gay dating scene, masculinity is vastly preferred over femininity in men. Even the majority of feminine gay men much prefer more masculine-leaning men over other feminine men. Not that it would really matter with Blaire, because he obviously preferred masculine men as well. He made a video venting about how difficult dating was for him, feeling that he was too feminine for gay men to be attracted to. However, he may have noticed a certain kind of man that he was attracting, and though he didn't outright say this in the video, I know that he more than likely was attracting down low and or closeted bisexual men who had no interest in dating him and only wanted to have sex with him. This is something that every feminine presenting gay man goes through, and it can definitely be frustrating to deal with when you're wanting an actual relationship, which Blaire more than likely was wanting, especially with how he was dealing with the rejection he was facing from his family at the time. So putting this all together, where he's trying to live a life with a family that didn't accept him for who he was as a person, dealing with the hardships of the gay dating scene, and even just dealing with the judgment from society from other people, I'm more than sure that this must have really got to him, and he internalized all the negativity that he was getting from practically the world around him. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that everything in his life he faced may have been negative, but as the saying goes, you tend to remember the negatives more than you remember the positives, and in Blaire's case, I feel that he probably felt that he experienced a lot more negatives than positives in his situation. I'm more than sure that he desperately wanted to be accepted by his family, as well as find love, and just be accepted without having to deal with being ostracized from society. And it is here where he more than likely stumbled upon the transgender ideology and started believing that this was the solution to gaining acceptance from both his family and society at large. And I also do believe that he did genuinely believe that he was a woman because he had no desire or want to conform to masculinity, because he really was just being himself. So Blaire goes through with the delusion, thinking that he is a type of woman, but much to his shock and frustration, this did not make a difference to his family at all. His family still refused to accept him. They more than likely knew that deep down, he was still just an effeminate gay man, and they wanted nothing to do with him. From what he shared in an old livestream around the holiday season, he was still banned from attending family gatherings because they didn't want to deal with his presence. His father especially never accepted him till death did him part.
Last night I kind of was feeling gutsy, and I texted my grandmother and I said, I'm like, am I going to be invited to Christmas this year? Because I have not been to Christmas or any holidays or any family gatherings since my dad died 6 years ago when I was 19. I'm 25 now. And I was like, so am I going to be invited to Christmas this year? Because I booked a flight to see Joey's family and that's all locked. And it just makes me so sick to think that I have Joey's family who all accept me and love me, and they met me a year ago, and then my own family I don't get any love from. And my mom's side of the family is fine, but my dad's side is not. And I texted, I was like, am I going to be invited to Christmas? And I got a text back saying, basically no. And I texted my grandma, I was like, I need for you guys to just tell me once and for all that you don't want me around, because they never tell me. They just don't talk to me, they don't invite me, and they act like me transitioning never happened. And I was like, I really need someone to just tell me straight up to my face and be an adult about this and just tell me that you don't want me around, because me living in limbo and questioning if I'm ever going to have a relationship with my family, if I'm ever going to see my great grandmother again, if I'm going to be invited to my great grandmother's funeral, she's 95, it really hurts me. And long story short, I had to beg her for like an hour to even talk to me. And then we had a phone conversation today. No Christmas, no Thanksgiving, no calls, no calling to check and see if I'm dead or alive, nothing. And then my grandma was like, well, you didn't call me on Mother's Day. And I'm like, you guys have told me you don't want me around. How am I supposed to feel comfortable hitting you up on Mother's Day? Yeah, I probably should have, But it's been 6 years of you guys not wanting me around.
The dating world also didn't really change much for him neither, as he was, or rather still, attracts the same kind of men he very well was already attracting, whom were fetishistic closeted men. The only difference is that he more than likely was attracting a higher quantity of these men, but the quality of them were still pretty much the same. I remember in an old livestream he did back in either 2015 or 2016, where he admitted that one of the guys he was seeing literally made Blaire hide in his closet at his dorm when his parents did a surprise visit and he didn't want his parents to meet or even know about him. And I'm more than sure that he was still mostly meeting men who only wanted hookups until he met his current boyfriend Joey. And Joey himself is a head case altogether. He claims that he is a straight man, even though he has hooked up with feminized men in his past, and not to mention that he has been in a long-term relationship with a man for years now. He's even attempted to get engaged with said man. In their Is Joey Gay video, Blaire asks him if he's ever been attracted to other quote-unquote men like himself, to which he declines, and instead of following up and asking him if he's ever been attracted to feminine men, specifically feminine presenting men, he just totally skips over to the next question.
So for all intents and purposes, obviously the easiest word to describe my sexuality is straight.
So have you ever dated a biological man who presented as such and wasn't transgendered, didn't transition, any of that, just like a straight up like someone like you?
Like a dude?
Someone like
a
you.
bro?
Someone like you.
Like I dated like a guy like that walks and talks like a guy?
Yeah.
No.
Exactly. Do you think your orientation is something that you have any like psychological reason for, or like something in your past, anything like that?
I think the delusion speaks for itself here. So now with this past out of the way, let's get into where we are now and the simple reality of it all. The truth of the matter is that Blaire only comes off as reasonable if you believe that gender stereotypes should have an indefinite place in defining man and woman. That the scope of what a man and woman is should be measured in how much one conforms to gender stereotypes the most. That essentially women and men are a bunch of costumes. And it's easy to be against surface level things like being against children transitioning, speaking out against authoritative dating expectations, and the topic of trans in sports. It's practically a slight concession when a trans-identified person is against these certain things, but it doesn't undermine the subtle demands that they want. In Blaire's case, of course it's easy for him to not support trans-identified men in sports because he's not an athlete. And of course he can speak out against the demand to date trans-identified people when he's already in a relationship, and also has stated that he wouldn't date another trans-identified person. And of course Blaire can speak out against SRS, aka sexual reassignment surgery, because he never planned on seriously going through with it in the first place, because he knows that it's genital mutilation. The point is that Blaire has no personal stakes when calling these things out, because he really has nothing to lose speaking out against these things that don't seriously affect him on a personal level. But notice how he remains mostly silent when it comes to the topic of women's restrooms and locker rooms. He has never once spoken out about how trans-identifying men should not be entering women's restrooms or locker rooms. If Blaire really is about caring about women and girls, why hasn't he spoken out against men, regardless of how they identify, invading women's restrooms with the same energy that he does for women's sports? It's foolish to even believe that Blaire's dysphoria was cured after he got FFS and pectoral implants, considering that he now seems to be addicted to plastic surgery. This is not self-acceptance or self-security at all. The money that he has spent on the pec implants, the facial feminization surgery, and cosmetic plastic surgery could have been used on cognitive therapy to get actual help to deal with his true issues. And even with this in mind, even with all the FFS, lip fillers, pectoral implant touch-ups, and so on, he still feels the need to film and photo himself with heavy facial editing filters and sometimes even body editing filters as well. This to me does not signify acceptance of self and a healthy body image. Even when he shows photos of himself without makeup, he still feels the need to heavily edit and wear mascara and or false lashes to obscure what his face really looks like. Now to the women who say that they are okay and or respect Blaire because he doesn't say that he is a woman, you have to understand that he still is insinuating that he's a kind of woman when he calls himself a trans woman. The term trans woman is an oxymoron because the only way to be a woman is to be an adult human female being, and you shouldn't be falling for this manipulative, reverse psychology because he's still saying that he's a woman without directly saying that he is a woman. If you still don't understand the issue here, let me put it like this. What is Blaire doing that is making him a type or kind of woman? If you answer with how he tries to present himself as a woman with long hair, makeup, his clothes, and/or his chest implants, are you really gonna sit here and say that womanhood is about wearing makeup, having long hair, and showing off your breasts? Do these things really define what being a woman is all about? What about women who don't wear makeup, prefer to have really short hair, don't dress in a scantily clad way, and/or is flat-chested? Are they not women? You just gotta be real here. These things do not define women. Being an adult human female is what makes you a woman. And the only people who say that the word woman is restrictive or is reductive are either men, specifically trans-identified men, or women with low self-esteem and fell for the lie that gender roles and stereotypes are what define men and women. And to really drive the point home, if you're a woman watching this, are you really gonna say that you aren't a woman when you take off your makeup, tie back or pin up your hair, and slip into comfortable clothes that are not sexualized? Exactly. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying that Blaire can't dress the way he likes or prefers. He can wear and style himself however he pleases. The issue is him thinking that he is some kind of woman for doing any of this, and pretending that he is anything but an effeminate, gender non-conforming gay man. And again, that is the main issue with him. And I really do believe that women need to stop gassing him up for saying the most surface level things, and they need to hold him to the same standard as they would do to any other trans privilege activist. He is simply no ally to women. He doesn't actually care about women. He only cares about his own self-interest, and women need to understand that you are not the bad guy for calling a spade a spade. It's not hate to call Blaire what he actually is, and it's not hate to tell Blaire that he has no right accessing women-only spaces that were not made for him in the first place. As Magdalene Burns once said,
I understand why women don't want to misgender or make these guys feel bad, but at the same time, women aren't taught to stand up for themselves, man. Stand up for yourself.
Blaire being seen as true trans just because he quote-unquote passes more than the average trans-identified man, the frank reality is that he doesn't pass, and that when it comes to his online presence, he uses beauty filters, angles, editing, and posture tricks to mask what he really looks like in real life. Honestly, in real life, he looks about as much as a woman as Dylan Mulvaney, and the only difference between Blaire and Dylan is that Dylan doesn't use glorified parlor tricks to deceive others on what he actually looks like. The sentiment behind the whole true trans argument is that only gay men impersonating women and lesbians impersonating men are actually trans. And all that really boils down to is pure homophobia, the modern day essence of gay erasure and gay conversion therapy. The common belief is that Blaire doesn't fetishize women, but I don't think that this is necessarily true. I don't believe that he finds women sexually attractive like that of an autogynephile, but he fetishizes the sexualized look of a woman in order to attract men, and I feel that this can totally count as a form of fetishization, albeit more on a behavioral level. The truth about Blaire is that he's a covert trans privilege activist. He's not as aggressive or in your face compared to the average TPA, but he still uses TPA tactics. His method is simply agreeing on surface level things that don't affect him. He doesn't have children, so it's easy for him to speak out against trans kids. He's not an athlete in sports, so it's easy for him to speak out against trans-identifying men competing in women-only sports. And he already has a boyfriend and doesn't mind being treated as a fetish object by closeted men, so it's easy for him to speak out against trans-identifying people demanding people to date them. But again, notice how he tends to avoid things like using women-only restrooms, locker rooms, TSA lines, and/or changing your legal documentation like changing your sex on your social documents. And again, notice how he hasn't spoken about the #LetWomenSpeak movement, and how he hasn't condemned the men who terrorize the women who attend the events. or how he hasn't spoken about what he thinks about Kelly J. Keene and her fight for getting all men out of women-only spaces, regardless of who the man is or how they identify as. Blaire simply speaks on the surface-level stuff that doesn't personally affect him, with the hope and expectation that he will be given the special privilege to be seen as the exception and be allowed to use women-only spaces with no objection. And when it comes to the topic of trans children, the frank reality is that Blaire can speak out against the concept of trans children as much as he likes, but the simple fact of the matter is that he is a walking billboard of the belief that one can change their sex and that changing sex is possible. And it's this belief that is fueling the belief of trans children altogether.
And when I was living in Michigan, all my gender dysphoria that I had experienced from age 5 and on had come to a really, really awful head.
It's also worth noting that Blaire was originally supposed to have a debate with radical feminist Magdalene Burns back in 2018, in which he avoided after initially agreeing to it. They were going to debate on the topic of trans identity, but Blaire ended up postponing about 2 to 3 times until it got swept under the rug, and Blaire never followed up with it. Magdalene was also dealing with brain cancer, and when it worsened in 2019, to where she ended up being hospitalized and then sent to a hospice, Blaire came out with a tweet saying that he didn't feel right debating someone with brain cancer, totally ignoring the fact that their debate was scheduled months prior when Magdalene was still in optimal health. The reason why this is important is because this debate would have been with an actual quote-unquote TERF, the very people that he has actively avoided having a debate with because unlike the people he has debated in the past, whom were mostly conservatives, the gender-critical position is not rooted in religion, a demand or expectation to conform to gender roles, and/or conservative traditionalism. Honestly, I feel the reason why Blaire backed out of the debate with Magdalene was because he knew that he would have lost the debate. Never mind that Magdalene didn't fit the descriptive stereotype one thinks of when they hear the phrase radical feminist. Blaire was gonna end up looking like a huge fool with Magdalene doing to him what he himself did to ContraPoints in their debate. And so he avoided her until it was convenient for him to come up with an excuse as to why he never followed through having the debate with her. Fast forward to after Magdalene Burns passed away, he called to debate a TERF yet again in 2020 with a short video post, but just like with Magdalene, he again never followed through with it, and he even deleted the video post as well. Now I understand that this may be hard to believe since I provided no receipts of this, but I know what I saw over the years, and I'm more than sure that any other person who may have been watching and or following Blaire for at least the last 8 years may remember this and hopefully will chime in the comments. All I'm saying is this, don't you find it pretty telling that he never once has had a debate with a quote-unquote TERF, be it an actual feminist or a gender-critical person? It's even more telling how he has never debated a gender-critical woman on the matter, the very kind of woman who will not validate his gender identity, and it wouldn't be because of traditionalist and or religious reasoning, just pure objective reality. It's pretty clear why he refuses to do this, and why he jumped at the first convenient excuse that he could to avoid debating people who truly would take him to task and push back. I've noticed that Blaire has a habit of deleting or covering up things that don't go in his favor. The original debate tweets, messed up jokes that showcases subtle hints of misogyny. It's just obvious that he tries to shove away things that can be used against him that would shatter or at the very least cripple the hold and influence that he has on the court of public opinion when it comes to the whole true trans narrative. He has also privated and or deleted the video where he admitted that he uses women-only TSA check-in lines at the airport and how he'd get patted down by women TSA agents because his penis would always set off the alarm. The video was called True Transphobia on his Blaire Black channel that he has renamed the Blaire White Project. The reason why that was a big deal is because it showed how Blaire still accesses women-only spaces while not caring whether women were comfortable with him being in there. This also was a clue in that he more than likely uses other women-only spaces. In an interview he did with Kim Iverson, he said that he wouldn't access women-only locker rooms and showers, while in the same frame, he said that he does use women-only restrooms. And I mean, come on, let's be real here. Do you honestly believe that Blaire would use a men's locker room to change in? More than likely, no, he wouldn't. The point here is that he shouldn't be accessing any spaces designated for women, period, and this should not be up for discussion at all. You cannot make exceptions on this, because if you let one man into any women's only space, you have to let all of them in. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that women who don't mind or care if trans-identifying men invade their spaces does not supersede over the women and girls who don't want men in women-only spaces. Women fought long and hard to get their separate spaces from men, and it's not up for debate. The spaces were fought for women only. At the end of the day, this is not about whether Blaire is good or bad. It's all about the principle of how he uses his influence to get afforded special treatment when it comes to accessing women-only spaces, as well as using a much more covert style of trans privilege activism to push the nonsensical true trans narrative and/or ideology. Do I personally think that Blaire is bad? I wouldn't say that he is necessarily, but I do think that he's an opportunistic, disingenuous grifter. And I feel that it's about time that he finally got called out on the reality about him and other trans-identifying men like him. No, Blaire is not true trans. No, he is not a trans woman. And no, he is not an ally to women. Blaire is just an effeminate, gender-nonconforming gay man with internalized homophobia who only cares about his own self-interest and being seen as essentially an unironic special snowflake by being seen as the quote-unquote true trans who is based. And he wants to be revered as the token conservative quote-unquote trans woman because, well, think about it. How many prominent conservative trans-identifying men on social media do you know of besides him? Caitlyn Bruce Jenner is not really a social media figure, and with this in mind, there are hardly if any others who are, and this is what Blaire wants. Now please understand that I'm not saying that you shouldn't like him or his content. All I'm saying is that if you call yourself gender critical, or you want to help keep men out of women-only spaces, you have to hold him to the same standard as any other trans-identifying man wanting access to these spaces. And as far as Blaire goes, if he wants to continue believing in his delusion of thinking that he is any kind of woman, that is his own, frankly ridiculous prerogative, because the focus and attention should really be on the legislative rights and the vote to keep all men out of women-only spaces, regardless of how they identify. If Blaire wants to continue believing that he is the opposite sex, he has every right to do that, but he should not have the right to access women-only spaces of any kind, and if he still intends to invade these spaces, he should have to do so with the deliberate understanding that he is breaking the law and will have to deal with the consequences of it and be subjected to the penalty of breaking said law. I understand that some of the things I have shared here in this video can be seen as circumstantial because of the lack of receipts. There's just nothing I can do about that because of Blaire's habit of deleting and/or privating a good amount of his old videos, live streams, and tweets. But again, I know what I saw and I know that there are others out there who have been familiar with Blaire's content from even before he rebranded himself, who also know of or have seen this stuff as well. I contemplated long and hard on whether I should include this info or not, and I decided to go through with it because it just needed to be put out there. And I know that perhaps in time, more of this stuff will resurface. And to those who want to say that the only reason why I'm quote-unquote coming for Blaire is because I'm jealous of him or whatever, I'm not. Frankly, there is nothing in his life for someone like me to be jealous of. I live in reality as a gender non-conforming gay man, while he simply does not. There's no denying that it can be difficult at times living as a gender non-conforming gay man, but it is what it is. And I know that living in reality is simply the best path to take for one's own sanity. I hope that in time, Blaire can find his way back to reality someday, but in the meantime, he just needs to be held to the same standard as any other trans-identified man, and that is just all there is to it. Hey everyone, so while I was in the middle of finishing up this video, Blaire ended up uploading a video where he went to see a therapist and talked a bit about his past, and I just felt like it would be appropriate to share some quick thoughts about it. To be honest, I was already aware of the situation about his relationship with his father and his side of the family, but I did not think that the likely implication of childhood SA was one of them. I think it's pretty obvious that this is what likely happened to Blaire based on the words he used to describe him like evil and demon. It's really unfortunate that this happened to Blaire. No one should have to go through that ever. There's no excuse for it. And I don't blame Blaire at all for how he feels about his father. That said, everything he shared in the beginning half of the session confirmed my suspicions on why Blaire fell down the path of quote-unquote transgenderism. He shared that he dealt with bullying throughout his childhood as an effeminate little boy and was dealing with this negativity from both his family and outside of his family in the small town that he grew up in. And I'm sure as he got older and stepped into the gay dating world and experienced how undesirable feminine gay men were seen as to the type of men that he was attracted to, whom were more than likely masculine gay men, while on the other hand being treated as a fetish by closeted men, this was more than likely the final straw where he wanted to escape his life. He said that he thinks that his quote-unquote transition was probably a trauma response. I'm gonna say right now that it totally was. The way Blaire described his childhood, his past, it's clear that he felt that his life at the time was complete shit. The abuse from his father, the non-acceptance from his father's side of the family and his peers, and his place within the gay world. He clearly felt miserable and was desperate to escape what he felt in his mind was the faggy, effeminate, undesirable weirdo gay boy who was treated like shit, and he wanted to become a desirable woman to gain acceptance from both his family and society at large, and as well as be desirable to men. With all that being said, I still stand by what I have said about him in this video. I sincerely hope that Blaire gets to a point where he will begin to truly accept himself for who he is, but for now, he just needs to be held to the same standard as any other trans-identifying man, and to stay out of women-only spaces. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the therapy session. And that was the video. Thanks for watching to the end if you did, and yeah, until then, I will see you in the next video. Bye guys!